The religious leadership of the temple were not happy with Jesus. They were upset so much with him that they wanted to just throw him out of town. Jesus comes in the temple today, and he's quite different than we usually see him in the gospel, isn't he? We tend to look at Jesus as always being humble and meek and loving and kind and forgiving. Today we see Jesus as angry, and he's very angry. This is a pretty violent scene when you think about it. He comes into the temple, he makes a whip out of cords, and he begins throwing them all out of the temple, turning their tables over, telling them to get the sheep and the doves out of here. He's really angry. We need to look and understand, why was Jesus so angry? First of all, some people think that this is a gospel saying that Jesus would have been against fish fries and reverse raffles in parishes. And that's not what it's about. What Jesus was angry about was that they were cheating each other. In the Synoptic Gospels, the line is, "My house is a house of prayer, and you have made it a den of thieves." I like that translation better. Because what was happening was the people needed animals for worship. And in the Passover, they came from long distances to get to Jerusalem, to the temple. And they were all to offer an animal for sacrifice. And as a convenience to them, they would provide animals at the temple so that they didn't have to carry them on their long journey. So it was a good thing to begin with. The money that they were using was Roman money, but they couldn't use it in the temple because the insignia of the pagan emperor was on the coin, and he declared himself to be a god. And so they couldn't use that in the temple. And so they had their own coins in the temple treasury, and people needed to exchange their Roman money for those coins. What was happening was they were overcharging everybody for the animals, gouging them by their prices. And the coins, they were charging exorbitant rates of exchange for the exchange of the coins. Jewish people were stealing from their own Jewish people and treating them very badly. That's what Jesus was angry about, that they were cheating one another. We can ask the question, does that ever happen in the church? Do Christians sometimes treat each other badly? Unfortunately, I have to say that happens, doesn't it? Sometimes Christians don't act like Christians. But does that nullify the teachings of Christ? It certainly does not. There's a story of a man who had back surgery, and it was a beautiful spring day, and part of his therapy was to take a walk each day. So he decided to walk around the neighborhood. Because it was a beautiful day, people had their windows open. And as he walked by one house, he could hear someone playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but they were murdering it. It sounded awful. And so every day he would go by listening, thinking that the performer was going to learn how to do this and each day play it better until it reached perfection. But every day when he went by, it just got worse and worse and worse. He wasn't playing it the way Beethoven wrote it. Was that an indictment upon Beethoven? No, it was an indictment upon the performer. And sometimes Christians don't perform like Jesus wants us to perform. And I think that's the message in the gospel, that we need to live and act and speak like Christ would. That's what he wants us to do. And so we don't nullify the teachings of the church because someone doesn't do it right. Sometimes I hear people say that they don't go to church because everybody's just a hypocrite that goes to church. They pretend to be good people, but they're down deep. They do a lot of bad things. Well, there's probably some truth to that. I'm not in this church because I'm a perfect Christian. I'm in this church because I'm striving to become a good Christian. The church is not a haven for saints. It's a hospital for sinners. And it's so important for us to remember that. We're all growing in the likeness of Christ, and we fail, don't we? We fail. The good news is that Jesus Christ has forgiven us of our sins. When we hear Jesus say that destroy this temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days, referring to the temple of his body and his crucifixion. He would be crucified and in 3 days be raised from the dead. Jesus hung upon the cross for us. There's another parable about a stranger who came to town and decided he wanted to go to church. So he arrived at the church early for Mass, and he parked his car, and as he was getting out of his car, another motorist drove by and rolled his window down and said, "Hey, what are you doing? That's my parking place. You took my place." And the man said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He went and parked somewhere else. Then he got into the church and he knelt down to pray. And he bowed his head to pray, and a woman came up to him and said, "What are you doing? That's my place. Why are you sitting in my place?" And the man said, "I'm so sorry." And he got up and he went and sat somewhere else. As the Mass went on, people noticed that the stranger had nail marks in his hands, and that he was wearing sandals and there were nail marks in his feet. And they said to him, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And he said, "I took your place. I took your place." Jesus Christ took our place when he hung on the cross. He bore the burden of our sins on himself. Was he angry? No. He was not angry. He was filled with love and compassion, so much so that he died for us on the cross. That's the central meditation for us during the season of Lent, that Jesus died on the cross for us, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of love, out of love. And we're called to accept that grace from Jesus. The greatest thing we can do for Jesus is to accept the grace of his forgiveness. Last Wednesday night, I heard confessions from 5 o'clock straight, nonstop, until 20 to 9. It was a long time for me to sit in my confession, but it was a wonderful experience. I was so inspired by the many, many people who came in humility, acknowledging their sinfulness or their weaknesses, and asking God's forgiveness. And I couldn't help but feel the healing power of Christ, one after another, coming to rest upon all those people who came to say, "Lord, I need your forgiveness, I need your grace." Thursday night, it was another straight hour. Saturday morning, it was from 11 o'clock until 20 to 2, nonstop. People came. So I think something good is happening. Something good is happening when people recognize in themselves the need for Christ and the need for his forgiving love and the need for his grace. There's something good happening in our church. And so today we ask the Lord to help us to recognize that and to accept his gift from the cross. Jesus died on the cross for us out of love, and we need to return that love by the way we live. And so the Lord isn't angry, he's filled with love and wants only to give us his forgiveness. It's so marvelous when you think about it, that when the priest raises his hand and gives absolution in the confessional, it's not my hand, it's the hand of Jesus himself who is giving that absolution. When I say, "This is my body, this is my blood," I'm speaking in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. It's a powerful, humbling experience that bread and wine becomes his body and blood for you and for me as food for the journey. How personally God cares for us and how personally he's given us the help that we need. In the first reading, he spoke about the 10 Commandments. If we follow those in our life, they're not just commandments because he wants to exert his authority. They're acts of love. If we treat our neighbor according to the commandments and God according to the commandments, happiness will be ours and happiness will be others. And so today we thank God for bringing us here, that we can acknowledge how much he loves us, that we can accept his grace and carry it out into the world. The world needs to experience Christ through individual Christians. We have to be good performers, but not just performing, but acting sincerely from our hearts to be like Christ.